In 1763, decades before there was a United States to speak of, New Hampshire's royal governor built a summer estate on the shore of Lake Winnipesaukee. No American city had a public park yet. No American had a word for vacation. He built it anyway. 72 square miles of glacial water, 25 miles long, more than 260 islands scattered across it like something a retreating ice sheet forgot to clean up. By the middle of the following century, a railroad reached the lake's southern edge, and a steamship began ferrying passengers across water that had, within living memory, belonged only to the Pennacook people who named it. Grand hotels followed. Orchestras followed the hotels. For the better part of 100 years, this was the place America went to be somewhere else for a week. Today, some of that same shoreline sells for $16 million a property. 15 minutes away by boat, another stretch of it has been described, without much argument from the people who live there, as chronically depressed. This is the story of how one lake became two entirely different Americas and what it took to split them apart. Chapter 1: The Lake That Came Before the Country. Before it was a real estate market, Lake Winnipesaukee was a hole in the granite left behind by a retreating ice sheet, and it has never entirely stopped behaving like one. The lake covers 72 square miles, stretches 25 miles from its northern tip to its southern outlet, and widens to 15 miles at its broadest crossing. A body of water large enough that a boat leaving one shore on a foggy morning cannot always see the other. It sits 504 feet above sea level, high enough that its water arrives cold and stays cold, fed not by one river, but by dozens of streams, running down off the granite hills of the White Mountain foothills, the Ossapees pressing in from the east, the Belknaps rising to the south, the Sandwich Range closing the horizon to the north. At its deepest point, the lake drops 180 feet, far enough that sonar surveys of the bottom still turn up surprises, decades after the first ones were run. None of this was designed. All of it was left behind. The ice that carved the basin did not clean up after itself. When it retreated, it dropped debris across the flooded basin in uneven piles, and those piles became islands. More than 260 of them, scattered across the water in no pattern a map maker would ever choose on purpose. Most are smaller than a quarter acre. Some disappear entirely at high water and reappear in a dry August, present on no chart and absent from none. They share no name, no history, nothing at all except the glacier that made them and the lake that now surrounds them. A retreating ice sheet is not a careful contractor. It is closer to a machine that ran out of instructions in the middle of the job and simply left. People arrived to fish it, not to admire the debris field. The Pennacook and Abenaki-speaking people worked this shoreline for generations before any European saw it, and it was the Pennacook who gave the lake the name that survived them, Winnipesaukee. What the name means has been argued over for roughly 2 centuries now, in the particular way that oral place names get argued over once the people who coined them are no longer being asked to explain. The most repeated translation renders it as the smile of the Great Spirit. Other translations disagree, sometimes sharply, and none of them can be checked against a written record that never existed. This is not a settled fact. It is an inherited guess that has outlived every scholar who tried to correct it. John Wentworth was a Portsmouth-born aristocrat who had studied at Harvard, traveled to London to lobby on behalf of New Hampshire's merchants, and come home carrying both a colonial pedigree and a taste for English landscape fashion that no one had yet applied to New Hampshire's own wilderness. He arrived at the shore of Lake Winnipesaukee in 1763, when the township surrounding the site counted fewer than 50 families. There, at what is now Wolfeboro, He built Kingswood, not a farm, not a trading post, not a fort, but an actual pleasure ground, stocked with a deer park and laid out with formal gardens in the manner of an English country estate transplanted wholesale onto granite. No American city had a public park yet. No American had built a summer house for the simple reason of wanting somewhere pleasant to spend the summer. Wentworth built one anyway, decades ahead of a country that did not yet exist to catch up to him. Kingswood did not stay Kingswood, and neither did the man who built it. Wentworth did not live to see what became of his lake. He also did not live to see who moved in behind him, once a royal governor's summer whim had already proven, without meaning to, exactly how much this shoreline was worth wanting. Ecclesiastes Chapter 2. A name outlives a house. The town does not wait long to claim its own name. In 1770, 7 years after Wentworth raised Kingswood on the shore, the settlement growing up in its shadow incorporates as Wolfeboro, and the choice is not accidental. James Wolfe died in 1759 outside Quebec on the Plains of Abraham, in the battle that broke French power in North America and made the British Crown for the first time the undisputed master of the continent's northern half. Colonial New Hampshire in 1770 is still living inside that victory, still counting it as the event that made frontier land like this safe enough to summer on rather than merely survive. Naming a lakeside township for the general who died winning that safety is not sentiment. It is bookkeeping, dressed as tribute. For half a century, the town and the estate grow as one thing wearing two names. Wolfeboro is where the roads end, and Kingswood is where they were built to end at. And every ledger, every deed, every traveler's account of the region treats the governor's summer house as the reason anyone bothers with this shoreline at all. The prestige is borrowed, not earned twice over. The town has no industry of its own yet, no export, no reason for a stranger to know its name, except that a royal governor once thought the view worth building for. It is a satellite settlement orbiting a single house. That arrangement survives Wentworth's own political ruin, survives the Revolution, survives the Crown itself losing its 13 colonies. What it does not survive is fire. Kingswood burns to the ground in 1820. The record does not preserve how. No lightning strike confirmed, no candle left burning, no account detailed enough to trust, only that the house Wentworth built as the first pleasure-only estate in northern New England stood for 57 years and then did not stand at all. What burns is not incidental. It is the entire physical justification for why this particular stretch of shoreline mattered more than the next cove over. And yet, the town keeps the inheritance the house can no longer back up. Wolfeboro does not quietly become an ordinary Yankee farm town once its founding mansion is ash. It does the opposite and starts calling itself, in the decades after, America's oldest summer resort. The claim is not a lie exactly, but it is not a surviving structure either. It is not a building anyone can walk through. It is an actual date anyone can cite, 1763, the year Wentworth first came to build. A resort town, in this case, turns out to need no resort standing in it. It needs only a year, repeated often enough, in enough guidebooks, by enough people with no reason to check. What the claim cannot manufacture is a road. Through the 1840s, Wolfeboro and the rest of the Winnipesaukee shoreline remain reachable the way they were reachable in Wentworth's day, by cart tracks that turn to mud every spring, by stagecoach lines that take the better part of a day to cover 20 miles, by the lake itself, still the only route that does not depend on the season cooperating. No rail line touches this water. No timetable governs how long it takes to get in or out. A town can brand itself the oldest resort in the country and still be, in practical terms, one of the hardest to reach. And for the next 30 years, Whatever the shoreline could become simply waits on that fact to change. And then, in 1848, it does. Chapter 3. The Railroad Reaches the Water. In 1848, the Boston, Concord, and Montreal Railroad lays track into the village of Weirs, on the lake's southern shore, and ends decades of the region talking to itself in mud and rumor. The village takes its name from something older than the survey stakes, the wooden fish traps, weirs, that Pennacook fishermen wove into the narrows there long before anyone priced the land by the acre. The traps are gone. The name isn't. Wolfeboro spent a century arguing its way into a founding date, a charter, a general's name borrowed from a war it never saw. Weirs doesn't argue. It gets a platform, a water tank, and a line running south to Boston. And for a town on this lake, that turns out to be argument enough. The rails have arrived. The following year, the railroad buys a small steamship named the Lady of the Lake and puts her to work carrying passengers straight off the train and onto the water. Before 1849, reaching Winnipesaukee from Boston costs a full day on rough road. Wheels sinking in spring mud, axles breaking on the ruts past Alton, the last few miles walked when the weather turns against a wagon. After 1849, it costs a morning. A man leaves Boston at sunrise, changes from rail car to gangplank at the new station in Weirs, and is swimming in the lake before the afternoon is old. The distance hasn't moved, only the time it takes to cross it has. By 1872, the traffic the Lady of the Lake carries alone has outgrown one small boat, and a new vessel launches from Alton Bay to meet the demand, the Mount Washington, a wooden sidewheel steamer, 178 feet long, built wide, built slow, built to last. She isn't fast. She isn't meant to be. She is meant to move rail tourists, dozens at a time, then hundreds. Between the lake's scattered landings, stitching resort town to resort town along a shoreline no road yet reaches. Her paddle wheels turn at a walking pace, and her deck holds more passengers than any coach the Boston, Concord, and Montreal has ever run. Bigger boat, same problem the railroad has been solving since Weirs, getting a stranger from Boston from where the train stops to where the water is worth swimming in. The Mount Washington becomes part of that answer. She isn't finished being one. By the late 1870s, 3 steamships work the lake at once: the Mount Washington, the Lady of the Lake, and a third boat named for the lake itself, the Winnipesaukee. And together they do what no single road and no single railhead could do alone. They connect every cove with a landing to every other cove with a landing, on a schedule, for a fare, regardless of what lies on the shoreline between them. A passenger can board at Weirs, cross to Wolfeboro, continue on to Alton Bay, and never once ask a horse to do the work. Wolfeboro is no longer an end point. It is one stop on a loop a paying passenger can ride in a single afternoon. The lake has stopped being a destination reached in spite of the distance. It has become a route. A route needs somewhere to stop. 3 steamships and a rail line now move more people, faster, than this region has ever moved anyone. And idle capacity is not a condition a railroad man tolerates for long. Every landing the Mount Washington touches, every platform the Lady of the Lake ties up beside, is now a plot of shoreline worth more than it was worth the year before. Somewhere along that shore, someone is already doing the arithmetic on what all this passing traffic is worth to whoever owns the right stretch of waterfront. Construction starts before the decade is out. Chapter 4. The hotels rise to meet the boats. By the final years of the 1890s, Weirs Beach is no longer a landing. It has become a destination that happens to keep a dock attached. Lakeside Avenue now runs the length of the shorefront, and nearly every building on it faces the water, timed to whichever steamer is due next. Step off the Mount Washington or the Lady of the Lake on a Saturday in 1898, and you already know which door to walk toward, because the town has organized its entire geography around the rhythm of arrivals: Porches face the dock. Signboards face the dock. Even the gardens are planted to be seen from the water, not from the road behind them. Nothing here was built to be looked at from the street because for years now there has been no street worth building toward. The largest of these buildings starts small. In 1880, a modest inn opens under the name Hotel Sanborn. A handful of rooms, a porch, nothing to separate it from a dozen boarding houses scattered along the same stretch of shore. Over the next 4 decades, it absorbs its neighbors one wing at a time, one summer's construction after another, until it operates under a new name entirely, the New Hotel Weirs. By the time that name is fixed, it is the largest hotel on the lake, the one every steamer captain names first when a passenger asks where to stay. It will still be standing, and it will still matter long after this particular building boom has ended. It does not stand alone. The lakeside house rises near it. The Aqueducton rises near that. The Endicott follows, and then Story's Tavern. 4 hotels within sight of the same dock, each one competing for the same clientele, the wealthy families of Boston and New York, who now arrive by rail and expect, at minimum, a dining room with linen, a porch facing the water, and an orchestra on Saturday nights. Room rates at resorts of this class run somewhere in the range of $2 to $4 a night. A full season's stay, room and board together, can run into the hundreds of dollars. 4 hotels, 1 shoreline, 1 train schedule out of Boston. The competition is not subtle, and it is not gentle, and it does not let up once the season starts. Wolfeboro builds its own version of the same economy on its own calendar. The Hotel Elmwood opens in 1872, 8 years ahead of the Sanborn, and for decades it anchors the town's own claim on the same moneyed traffic, moving north from Boston and south from Montreal. The building itself is gone now. The ground it stood on holds the Wolfeboro post office, a counter, a row of boxes, a flag, where guests once left calling cards for families they had not yet met and would not remember by autumn. None of this works as 2 separate resorts. It works because the steamships already crossing the lake do not stop at Weirs and turn back. They continue past the islands, down to Wolfeboro's own docks, and around again. A loop, not a line. A family can leave the new Hotel Weirs on a Monday morning, take dinner in Wolfeboro by evening, sleep at the Elmwood, and be back at Story's Tavern before the week is out, having never once touched a road or hired a carriage. The lake itself becomes the only street that matters, and every hotel on it is really one stop on a single circuit that never stops moving, all summer, every summer. By 1900, that street is filling in fast, storefront by storefront, season by season, hotel by hotel, the number that will define exactly how full it gets. The count of hotels, saloons, and shops packed onto a single stretch of Lakeside Avenue in the years just before 1910 has not been reached yet. Chapter 5. The Fire of November 9th. By 1910, the count reaches roughly 40. Hotels, saloons, and shops packed onto a single quarter-mile of Lakeside Avenue, storefront against storefront, awning against awning, porch light against porch light, on ground that 60 years earlier held 2 sawmills, a scatter of fishing camps, and nothing else. Picture that street on a Saturday evening in the summer of 1910. The new Hotel Weirs runs the length of 2 city blocks, strung end to end with electric bulbs along 3 tiers of porches. Current here before it reaches most American towns twice this size. 3 orchestras play in 3 hotel ballrooms within a half-mile of one another, the music overlapping at the property lines. The Mount Washington's whistle sounds twice as she rounds the point, and the dock fills with porters, steamer trunks, and families who stepped off the morning train and will not see their own front door again until Labor Day. 60 years earlier, this shoreline had no dock at all. Tonight, it has an orchestra on every corner. The season holds that shape for 14 more years. Hotels change hands, porches get rebuilt, the crowds keep arriving on schedule each June and leaving on schedule each September. Then, late on the night of November 9th, 1924, with the season long since packed away and most of the boardwalk shuttered for winter, a gale moves down the length of the lake and meets a fire already working through the buildings near Tower Street. Laconia's fire chief, Arthur Spring, arrives with his companies to find the wind doing the work a normal fire cannot do on its own. Carrying sparks from roof to roof faster than hose lines can be laid between them. He fights the blaze for 6 hours. The wind does not let up, and the fire does not hold to one block. It moves along Lakeside Avenue the way the hotels themselves once moved along it, building by building, until 13 structures stand burned in a single night. The new Hotel Weirs, the hotel that started in 1880 as a modest house called the Sanborn and grew, edition by edition, into the largest hotel on the lake, along with 12 other buildings on Lakeside Avenue and Tower Street. Spring and his men bring the fire under control near 5 o'clock the following morning. By sunrise, the accounting is plain. $350,000 in resort property is gone. The ballrooms, the porches strung with electric bulbs, the dock front commerce that took 60 years to build up from a mill pond and a footpath. Guests who danced in 3 ballrooms within a half-mile of each other in 1910 have, by 1924, no ballroom left to return to. The lot where the new Hotel Weirs stood sits empty through the following spring. It sits empty through the spring after that. Chapter 6. 67 Years of Steam. The new Hotel Weirs is never rebuilt. The insurance settles, the lot is cleared of char and broken glass, and for a while there is talk in Laconia of a new structure to take its place, larger even than the old one. The talk does not survive the decade. By 1924, the automobile has already begun to do to the lake's hotels what the fire did to one of them in a single night. It is loosening 30 years of visitors from a schedule built around trains and steamers, and it does not need 6 hours or a fire chief or 3 ballroom orchestras to do it. It needs a paved road and a full tank of gas. The hotel economy at Weirs and Wolfeboro and along the shoreline in between was never really about hospitality. It was about captivity. A vacationer arriving by rail at the Weirs Depot in 1910 had one route onto the water, the Mount Washington's dock, the Lady of the Lakes dock, the schedule printed in the Boston papers, and one place to sleep once the boat was through with him for the day. The new Hotel Weirs, the Lakeside House, the Aqueducton, the Endicott, Story's Tavern, the Elmwood at Wolfeboro, each one collected a share of a crowd that had no other way to be on the lake. Take away the captivity, and the hotels are just large buildings full of rooms nobody has to rent. The automobile takes away the captivity. A family with a car in 1926 does not need the 9:40 train, does not need a room at the Lakeside House, does not need the steamer schedule at all. It drives to the lake, rents a cottage from a farmer, glad of the cash, and comes and goes as it likes. The wealth that used to concentrate itself night after night into a handful of grand buildings along Lakeside Avenue begins instead to scatter itself across 100 small camps with no name and no orchestra. The Depression finishes the argument the automobile started. The Hotel Elmwood, standing at Wolfeboro since 1872, closes its doors and is demolished in 1933. 61 years of continuous operation ended not by fire, but by an absence of guests willing to pay for a room built for an economy that has already moved on. Smaller houses go the same way through the rest of the decade. Boarding houses at Weirs, at Alton Bay, at Center Harbor, built 2 and 3 rooms at a time to catch the overflow from the big hotels in their good years, now standing half empty through Augusts that used to be booked solid by June. They do not burn. They do not make the papers. They simply stop taking guests one by one. and the buildings are sold for whatever a farmhouse fetches or torn down for the lumber. The ship survives all of it. The fire of 1924, the scattering of the automobile years, the bank failures, 9 years of Augusts with empty rooms up and down the shoreline. And then, on an evening in December of 1939, it does not survive the winter dock. Fire breaks out in the railroad station at Weirs, the same station where 3 generations of trunks and steamer trunks and honeymooners had been unloaded since the line opened, and it runs down the ramp toward the water faster than anyone can organize against it. At the bottom of the ramp, frozen into place by a winter of low water, sits the Mount Washington. 178 feet of hull that has not moved from the ice and now cannot move from the fire either. There is no channel open to run her out, no tug free to pull her clear, no icebreaker on the lake in the middle of December. She sits at her mooring the way she has sat at that mooring every winter since 1872, and the fire reaches her exactly there. She burns at the dock, and the station burns with her, and the boardwalk around both of them burns, and by the time the fire is out, there is no ship, no station, and 67 years of steam travel on Lake Winnipesaukee ended in the space of one December evening. The lake enters the summer of 1940 without a flagship. Chapter 7. The Cheap and the Quiet. The lake does not stay silent for long. 90 miles south, on the Vermont shore of Lake Champlain, a retired steamer named the Chateauguay has sat idle for years, her hull still sound enough to salvage. In the winter of 1939, a crew cuts her apart into 20 numbered sections, loads them onto flatbed rail cars, and hauls them north and east across 2 states to the shore where the old Mount Washington burned 11 months earlier. Through the spring of 1940, the sections are welded and bolted back into a single hull, lengthened in the process to 205 feet, 27 feet longer than the ship she replaces. On August 12, 1940, the SS Mount Washington II slides into the water under her own power. The original vessel took local capital and years to build from nothing back in 1872. This one takes a single season, assembled from a hull built for a different lake entirely. No hotel economy remains to greet her. The lake rebuilds its own icon anyway, 20 sections at a time, because it can. Weirs Beach does not wait for the hotels to come back either. What began in 1916 as a loose gathering of motorcyclists drawn to the beach for no reason beyond the ride itself hardens, across the 1930s and into the post-war years, into an annual fixture with a name, Laconia Motorcycle Week. It becomes and remains the oldest motorcycle rally in the country, run on a shoreline that no longer has the rooms to house the crowd it draws, filled instead with tents, roadside stands, and engines. In 1952, a 21-year-old named Robert Lawton borrows $750 from his grandmother. It is the entire capital behind what he opens that year: a penny arcade and an indoor mini golf course in a rented room above a shop on Weirs Beach, which he calls the Weirs Sports Center. The bet is small and the space is smaller, and both the arcade and the mini golf run on the same principle the grand hotels never needed: a customer spending a dime at a time, not a season's rent up front. 12 years later, in 1964, Lawton buys 21 acres, a short distance up the boulevard, moves the growing operation onto open ground, and renames it Fun Spot. The name means nothing yet outside Laconia. It will mean more later. The rest of Weirs Boulevard rebuilds itself the same way, cheaper and in pieces. Through the 1950s and 1960s, motels and cottage colonies rise where hotel porches once stood, built not for families booked in for a season, but for drivers passing through on the new interstate highways, stopping for a week, sometimes only a weekend. The tourism economy survives the collapse of the grand hotels. It survives at a fraction of the price per room and none of the architectural ambition that raised the Weirs and the Elmwood in the first place. Arcades, mini-golf, motorcycle engines, and Motel Neon replace verandas and dining rooms, seating 400. Away from the boulevard, something else begins without any of that noise. The same Boston and New York families who once reserved whole floors at the grand hotels for the season stop reserving floors. Through the middle decades of the century, they buy waterfront instead. A point of land here, a stretch of dock there, held privately, not rented, not advertised, recorded in deeds at the registry in Laconia rather than in any guidebook. There is no rush of purchases, no announced sale. Just one family, then another, deciding the lake itself is worth more than any hotel room facing it ever was. Nobody writing about the lake's post-war reinvention thinks to mention it. The arcade and the rally get the attention. The shoreline gets bought. By the late 1960s, the lake is running two economies at once, on the same water, largely invisible to each other. One built on nickels at Fun Spot and a week's rent at a roadside motel, the other on private title recorded quietly, lot by lot, decade by decade. Nobody on Weirs Boulevard is asking which one wins. Chapter 8. A lake split down the middle. Weirs Beach never stops trying to fix itself. A revitalization plan is issued in 1940, then again in 1947, then 1966, then 1979, then 1998, then 2007, then 2016. 7 attempts across 76 years to solve the same blighted boulevard of aging motels, vacant storefronts, and cottage colonies built for a crowd that stopped arriving by rail decades earlier. Consultants change. Boards change. The complaint on the page does not. Too many empty rooms. Too few reasons for the ones that fill up on a Saturday to stay past Sunday. Many of the boulevard's mid-century motels and cottage colonies are eventually sold off and converted into condominiums, their weekly rentals turned into deeded units, their front desks replaced by a homeowners association. No plan proposes tearing the boulevard down. Every one of the 7 proposes fixing it in place. One landmark on that boulevard does not need a plan. In 2008, Fun Spot is named the largest arcade in the world by Guinness World Records. The business Robert Lawton opened in 1952 with a $750 loan from his grandmother, the one that moved to 21 acres and took its permanent name in 1964, is now the closest thing Weirs Beach has to a landmark from its golden age, older than almost everything that has opened around it since, still standing where the grand hotels are not. Laconia Motorcycle Week, the same gathering that began on these streets in 1916, now draws more than 300,000 riders to the boardwalk every June. For 9 days, the boulevard is a solid wall of engines and leather, louder and denser than any crowd the electric-lit porches of 1910 ever held. By July, it has thinned back into a quieter place, selling the same T-shirts to a quieter crowd. The boulevard's 2 most recent attempts at reinvention are the Winnipesaukee Pier, rebuilt in the early 2000s, and the Bank of New Hampshire Pavilion, a concert venue that opened in 1996. Both are modest structures. A wooden walkway over the water, a shed with a stage and a lawn, measured against the memory of a 400-room hotel strung end-to-end with electric bulbs. Nothing built at Weirs Beach since 1910 has matched the scale of what burned, was demolished, or simply closed. None of this emptied the town. Laconia's population today stands near 17,000, close to where it has stood for decades. This was never the story of a mill town or a resort town hollowing out, the way so many others did across New England. Median household income is just over $73,000. The poverty rate is above 12%. Laconia did not disappear. It settled into something modest and stayed there. A short drive from that median income, On the same lake, a waterfront mansion in Wolfeboro is listed for $16 million, the most expensive home ever offered for sale in New Hampshire. On the shoreline, Wentworth first surveyed for the same reasons in 1763. Elsewhere on the lake, an island estate of roughly 30 acres of private shoreline carries an asking price of $20 million. Neither listing quotes a nightly rate. Neither one needs to. Wentworth chose this lake in 1763 for its beauty and for its distance from everything, and both are still true, alongside a third fact he never lived to see. The lake is now split cleanly down the middle, between those who own a piece of its shore and those who still only visit it. His own house did not survive to find that out. Kingswood burned in 1820, and nothing was ever built over its foundation. Only the name Wolfeboro and the claim to being America's oldest summer resort outlived him. The SS Mount Washington II is still on the water, tracing the same loop it has traced every summer since 1940. It is 205 feet of painted steel and salvaged timber, built from the hull of a stranger ship broken into 20 sections and reassembled on this shore after fire took the original. Its horn still sounds twice before each departure from Weir's Beach, the same signal it has given for 86 summers, and its wake spreads flat and white across water that never gave back so much as a foundation stone. It is the only piece of the golden era still doing the job it was built to do. The lake does not ask which side of the line its passengers stand on. It is still just water.